Hi everyone, welcome back to this episode of the 5710 podcast. This week's guest is Andrew Brown of Brown & Brown, a rural Scottish studio with a focus on bespoke private housing throughout Scotland. Founded in 2010 by Andrew and Kate Brown in the midst of an economic recession, the studio has gone on to be honoured with numerous national awards such as the Scottish Design Award and the Aberdeen Society of Architects Award. So, first question I'd like to ask you is, you've worked all over Scotland. You've worked on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And you worked on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And you've worked up north, and you've maybe done a bit out south, so you were down in Arran.
Yeah.
Any preference to, it's quite a difference. Being from the West Coast, I find it rains all the time, and even here it's
Yeah,
nice
I'm
and
from
dry.
the West Coast, but I would say that the interest is really in site-specific design, and I think people look at it as if Scottish architecture is a single typology, and I wouldn't say that it is. I would say that a building on Skye might be different to a building in Thurso or in Ayrshire.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're interested in site-specific design, which is what we are interested in, I would say as a primary concern, I would say that it's good the way things are different, and I think they are hugely different. People are different too, of course they are, and I think that partly reflects in places and buildings, that I think people are slightly different, whether it's West Coast or East Coast or North. We do a lot of things that are in places where there's extreme weather considerations, which I think is which is an interesting aspect to it. Whereas because our work is mostly rural in type, I think that the weather actually becomes more of a defining thing, as a driver, that you don't have on, say, an urban gap site. No. That kind of thing. So
I see you're building out in Baltos just now, out in Isle of Lewis.
No, we did a building in Baltos, one of our first projects,
really?
Maybe about 9 years ago, something like that.
I really liked it because I spent a year in Isle of Lewis.
Well, we are working on a project on Lewis just now at Borv, up on the north of the island, on the road up the west coast to Ness.
Yeah.
So Melbus Borv, to be specific. And it's a one-bed holiday home for someone who lives in Aberdeen, actually, but it's on his family croft. And he is intending, over the years, he will be intending to be returning to the island at some point. And it's a great site on the edge of the cliff, right on the sea. And again, it's really driven a lot by weather. He's a building surveyor by trade, so he's not a lead client, which means that we have a lot of discussions. Now that the design is done and planning is granted and building warrant is just going in, we have a lot of discussions about how flashing will work.
Oh, I see, because he knows the stuff.
Because he knows the stuff, and it's about how the weather will affect the lifespan and maintenance of buildings. So it becomes another. Obviously, there's a list of concerns that drive you towards choices and materials.
Is that a material concern? That was a question I was going to talk about later. That there's a lot of timber buildings in Scotland, and that's this idea of sustainability. These timber buildings probably won't be here in 60 years. They might rot away. Maybe.
But it depends. What do you mean by timber buildings? Do you mean clad or do you mean construction?
Timber construction, probably. They won't last as long as, say, as... Well, a lecturer once said to me in school, he asked me, what buildings do you see from Scotland that are really, really old? And you go, the stone ones. And very few people building stones these days. I mean, I'm interested to hear an opposition to that, yeah.
You find some buildings in the Northern Isles, for example, that are timber buildings that have been there for a long time. I think that it depends what you want to do. I mean, some of our buildings are stone, for example, and there's a reason for that. Cost is obviously part of it, and the fact that timber frame is so dominant in Scotland, it's seen as environmentally friendly. It comes from renewable sources, of course, and it's all FSC certified. Very, very little of it is Scottish timber.
German stuff,
which I think is worth noting, that we grow very little timber that is rated for structural use. And I think that it's also how much it's about carbon capture and all that kind of stuff as well, and embodied energy. And I think that you've got to, it's different horses for different courses, I would say. I mean, for example, we have a job just now that isn't timber frame at all. It's block and brick.
That the grey brick one?
Yeah,
really nice bricks,
and it's partly, well, I'm going to talk about it a little later on, but it's partly about, there's a certain reason that the client has conditions that lead to hypersensitive hearing.
Oh, really?
And it's actually about sound deadening and things, actually. So I would never look at a job and say this will be timber frame.
No.
I think that, like anything, the construction method is partly driven by place, the building, the client, the other considerations such as budget, such as might be lifespan, maybe the type of building. You know, it's different horses for different courses. If you're building a house, like we're doing a house just now, that's on the top of a hill, it doesn't have a road. You know, and we're putting in, there's a kind of farm track just now. Like, so it's got to be timber frame, because you couldn't get, well, we got some blocks up there to do the substructure, and it was extremely difficult. You know, and like getting concrete up there, the concrete was used very sparingly as a result.
Yeah.
I know, and I think that you can't just say it's site-specific design, but then they'll all be timber frame. I think the thing is that there's no line between when design stops and technology starts. And I think that blurring of it is that you're always designing. You know, that a 1 to 5 detail on an interior thing, a tender package is designing.
Yes.
And that's what I personally find interesting, is that every time a client brings something up that perhaps you didn't know about before, there's always a tendency for someone to think, oh, a new problem. Every problem is like a design brief.
Yes.
If you think about it, you know, so a choice as to what the construction method is a big one, you know, but there's always those little things all the way through. It might be about light switches, details are what interest me, you know, it might be about trying to get it so that a smoke alarm sits flush with the ceiling. So design never stops, it's always ongoing.
And do you find with things like those, the little stuff and the sort of contractor problems, do you find a good relationship with contractors?
Yes,
helps massively with
absolutely vital. I think that because the things that we're wanting to do, I hate to use the phrase crafted, but I suppose that's where you look at, you know, it's not
stuff that takes a bit of input from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They need to care about it.
And I think working with really good contractors, which we're lucky to do, I mean, sometimes we work with some who are not so good, but on the whole we work with a relatively small group of contractors, and I would say that they then start to learn how we want things. And if they come to us and say, we understand that you're doing X, and they understand why we're doing X, but we think there's a better way, there's no place for egoism. You know, it can only be about trying to keep striving towards that design intention. And how you get there, someone else might have a better way to do it, but what you care about is the building being done well. I had a meeting earlier, and I'm sure that, I don't mind saying this, at a site meeting where we had designed a staircase for a job, and there was a piece of steel was added to the structural engineer's package that wasn't there originally. Wasn't in the design package. And it wasn't in the tender package originally, and it appeared suddenly, but without an explicit conversation being had about it. So the stair no longer works as a result. So the contractor called us about it yesterday, and the first you get to whose fault it is later. What you get to is, to begin with, is how well can it be resolved, and we actually realised it can be resolved in a way that is better than the original intention, which is what we're doing. And the contractor site manager was the one who suggested that as a route, and then we started to look at it and we found out that yes, there is a way within what he suggested. So between us, we've come to it, and the reason I went to site this morning to look at it is that he's drawn out on the floor the template for how the new stair would fit. Just with tape or? With pen, he's drawn it out where all the goings would be and that kind of thing. And it is an improvement to the architecture. And at the end of the day, we are not concerned that the genesis of that idea didn't come from us. Yeah. But why would we be? Because at the end of the day, it's a building that we've designed, and we work with that contractor very well. They're an excellent contractor, you know, and they understand what we're trying to do. And once you have that relationship, they are then able to, because they're the ones who know more about putting things together than we do. Yes. They are able to suggest things perhaps along that are still going towards the same goal, but you have the benefit of their input, which is hugely beneficial. Because architecture are generally not makers. It's something that we often talk about, designer maker, and about craft. You know, and you'll see a little bit in the lecture that I'm going to give later about those illusions that I have about making things as well. But contractors are the ones who take the things from our head and make them real. And I don't think that enough attention is given to those relationships, and how fostering them is absolutely crucial to delivering buildings of a quality that you're looking for. You talked about the genesis of idea, then you're talking about contractor collaboration there.
it kind of makes me think about the university experience just now, where we're kind of the genesis of all our ideas are either expected to come from us, the students, or from the tutors, and we're both architects.
What do you mean from you though? Because where does
from precedents,
where does an idea come from?
Exactly. The question I'm asking is, do you think it would be beneficial in an ideal world that maybe contractors would work, or maybe as a certain point in the student process to, not contractors, but people studying business management and architecture technology, things like that. Because when I worked in placement, and it was only 1 year, obviously, massively I learned from the contractors. Contractors helped us out so much, and engineers and stuff as well. And in the studio, it's kind of all meant to be you. And do you think that's a bad habit to get into?
Yes, but I think it's a very as a former academic, I think it's a very difficult problem for the universities to solve.
No, obviously.
And I've seen myself through teaching lots of different ways people have tried to deal with that and to put that in place. I tried it myself when I was a lecturer, bringing in contractors that I was doing jobs with and getting them to input into the studio. And the thing is that I'm not sure whether, I think if it can be made to work properly in architectural education, I think it would be a huge bonus.
Yeah.
However, I think that
what happened in your example?
Architectural education is about teaching you how to think.
Yes.
It's not necessarily teaching you to be an architect, it's teaching you how to go on and become one, I would say. So I think that if what you take from that is that when you speak to someone, you should assume that they might know something that you don't know. And every time you do that and learn something from someone, you didn't know more than you did 5 minutes ago.
That's very true.
And I think that when you speak, like the site manager that I'm meeting this morning, I respect hugely. And I hope that they respect us hugely. And it was our error. And straight away, as part of fostering a good relationship, I didn't look to see whose fault it was. I put my hand up and said that it was our error. People make mistakes. If you're going to give people the freedom to be creative and do things, you have to accept that sometimes you will make mistakes, and that is a really important part of the process. So because the client trusts us implicitly, and we've always been honest with them, and because we tell them bad news, we don't sugarcoat bad news. It means when we tell them good news, they trust us. So the first thing I did was call the client and explain that it was our error, and explain that I didn't think there would be a financial ramification to it.
That's always a good one.
But if there was, that we wouldn't be trying to squirm our way out of it. But that actually I thought we had used it as an opportunity to come up with something better than what we were going to have, that is actually I wish we had come up with to begin with. And part of the reason we didn't is that we didn't have the input of the contractor at that point, because their input was crucial to getting that solution. So I think collaborative working, which again we'll talk about a little bit later in the lecture, is really crucial. It really is. I mean, there's a contractor that we work with who, it's just happened this way. It wasn't by plan, but it's been 7 or 8 years since they were building a job for anyone that wasn't us.
Really?
Yeah, they only do one job at a time, and they are in the process just now of building a house for us. That's an important job for us actually, and they're also building a new studio at the moment. And I know the person that runs that. I know when he looks at a drawing, say the drawing wasn't abundantly clear, because sometimes we're all fallible.
We all make mistakes.
He knows what we are trying to do because we've done 6-7 buildings with him. He understands what we're trying to do. He will put forward things because he understands how we want to work and how we want things to work out. And if we have the benefit of his experience and knowledge to suggest another way that someone with our education and background maybe doesn't have, with someone with his education and background, which is different. It's not inferior or superior, it's different.
And you talked about a good relationship there. Is it a conversation intensive one, or is it more of a trust thing?
It's a trust thing. It builds up over time though, and it comes from honesty, I would say. I think that architects, quite harshly, have a reputation for being aloof, and I would say that if you sit down with a contractor and they can see that you know yourself, well, you'll know yourself when you meet with a contractor and you think we don't want to work with them because they're the wrong sort of person as a company. And it's not about money, it's not always about quality, it's about values. It's about how, and I know that's slightly pretentious sounding, but it's about what's important to people. The contractor has to make money, and that's not a dirty word.
As does everyone.
As does everyone. And we try to explain to our clients early, of course you want the contractor to make money. If they don't make money on your job isn't done well. We want your job to be something they're passionate about. How many of us are passionate about something that sees us on the breadline? You know? So, but there's more to life than buying something for £1 and selling it for £2. And you need people that have a value system that is a bit of both.
They take pride in their work almost.
Yes.
Kind of boils into that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You know, and I think I think that architects don't praise contractors enough, actually. But when you find a bad contractor, we worked with a company once, and we did a few jobs and they were great. And then the person who ran that company, they were quite small, about 10 of them, had a huge life-changing event that changed his whole approach to how he ran his company. And this was during a project of ours, and it caused huge problems. And we will never work with them again. In fact, I think they went under now, actually. And it's that value thing, it turns out, wasn't the way I'd always thought it was with that company.
What do you mean?
I mean that...
We're talking about the values part.
Yeah, well, the company who I mentioned, who are only building jobs for us and have done for a long time, I know that if tomorrow their company was to go under through something catastrophic happening, that they would do everything that they possibly could to honour their commitments.
Yeah.
They would never...
leave you high and dry.
They would never fold and set up under a different name and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We had a project, for example, that, again, we'll talk about a little bit later, where the relationship between the client and the contractor soured towards the end of the job, but no one's relationship with us did. And the client basically was trying to not pay what they should have paid to the contractor.
I haven't.
And the contractor ended up losing a lot of money on the job, but continued to properly resource and deliver the project, even though they lost what, to a company of their size, was a huge sum of money. And at the time, we were administering the contract fairly, and the client wasn't fulfilling their obligations. And we spoke to the contractor about why they were continuing to honour theirs. And they said, because it's not about this job, it's about the next one we'll build with you, the one after that, and the one after that. And that did end up to be the case.
Oh, terrific.
Partly because of that. Because if you see that people are really committed to what they're doing, I don't know what more you can ask than that, really.
Sounds nice, yeah. Sounds good. Okay, we'll swap over to some different subject.
Okay.
We're talking about contractors a lot. Social media.
Yes.
You have quite a good Instagram, I think.
Do you think so?
And an excellent website. And you can tell you've put a lot of investment and interest.
We'll have a new website from next week.
I heard you were getting one, yeah. I heard. Do you think that some of that comes from you wanting to display yourself as the best you can be, or is it is it to do with money, or is it to do with pride? You know, it goes back to that pride of work, and I can see that. You know, I want a nice website. We have taste. I want it to match that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's about that, or do you think there really is? It's economic driven?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think you can't ignore economics in it, but I think for myself, I can tell you the journey that we kind of went through with it is that I'm not drawn to social media, and I find it extremely difficult to speak about our work and blow our own trumpet in such a way, because I feel as if it's too closely related to myself personally, and as a person, that's the opposite of my personality.
Oh, okay.
And I think it took a long time for me to realise that the output of our practice, and celebrating that and talking about it and showing people what happens behind the process, 99% of what you do is not the finished article of a building. Mm-hmm. It took a long time for me to separate that from that hesitancy I had about putting myself forward in a way.
Yeah, because it's quite a personal thing.
It's very, and I am not a social media person, but I found myself, I quite like that window into the background of what happens behind designing and delivering buildings, that normally you don't show a client, in a way, you don't show potential clients, I should say, whereas being able to show people site photographs, to be able to show people sketches or drawings that are partly conceived
compared to fully finished, the
absolutely.
picturesque thing. You don't see a lot of that in architects' Instagram.
Well, we're very interested in the process, not just the output. I don't know whether that comes from having been in academia and that having been one of my areas of interest, or whether or where the driver for it is actually, truth be told. But I'm really interested in it. I'm going to speak a bit about that later as well, because it's so entwined with what we're trying to do. Is that buildings are about people, and I know that's really pretentious, but they are. And when you work,
they're built for people.
But when you work at a domestic scale, the people who inhabit and use those buildings really drive, or should really drive, how those buildings are formed and delivered. And not enough attention is paid to what process do those people go through, what are they scared about, what are they excited about, how do they come to a meeting, what do you say that shocks them to their core that you don't realise does, and vice versa. You know, what is the process like for them? I think over the last couple of years we've made a shift towards trying to understand what the client experience is. I think architecture, I'm sure some architects do it really well, but I can only speak for us personally that I now, with hindsight, don't feel as if we did it as well as we now do, or as well as I hope we will do it in a year from now. And I think that understanding that it's, I hate the word journey, but if you think about it, if someone is commissioning a house, we do have some repeat clients, but most people will do it once in their life.
Yes,
it will be a huge thing, and they're terrified of it, some of them, because everyone's scared of what they don't know. You know, and what you want to make them understand is they have not come to you for you to bestow upon them from your genius ability, which I think comes partly from the architecture education system that you mentioned before. I think that it's their building.
Yes.
And actually, if you make them feel involved in the process and you develop a relationship with them, they will be more likely to listen to what you say, because they don't need to agree with you and they don't need to pick the things that you want them to.
No, it's what they want.
You need to know, well, you need to know that they have considered what you have said, not that they have agreed with what you have said. And I think the understanding that process is actually something that I think perhaps I was a little bit hesitant about, as most architects are. We leave university believing that... Is
that from scared of upsetting the clients or saying the wrong thing, or is it...
Well, there's a certain detachment to clients in education, I think, and then most of us go into work for, well, whether it's a big or a little practice, you're very rare that when you first go in, you have direct client experience.
Yeah.
It's very rare, you know. I worked some places...
You have to sit in the background sometimes, take notes, kind of
stuff. Perhaps, yeah, but I mean, I worked for one practice in particular, and I'm happy to Rural Design, who, it wasn't a long time, but it was a very important experience for me, you know, and it's, I think that relationship to the client, and I didn't know before I went to work for them that my real interest was in small scale work. I mean, the jobs...
Because you're at RMGM before.
I was at RMGM.
That's totally different scale, yeah.
Recession driven, like everyone else that was at RMGM at the time. We were a bit of a gang of strays that had come from design practices in Edinburgh.
Okay.
There was a lot from Malcolm Fraser, there was some from Richard Murphy, like myself, and just different, some from Eldon Cannon. Fantastic practices, the ones I'm listing, great practices that I respect the work of, but it was a horrible time for everyone, you know. And I loved the work of Rural Design. You know, and I made a commitment to moving to Skye.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. You know, I really enjoyed it, and I think that they taught me a lot about small scale buildings and what's important, and also about clients. And I think a lot of people leave a firm and then look back on it with some sort of rancour. Which I find.
What do you mean rancour, sorry?
Well, you know, a lot of people will badmouth the places that they have worked. Sometimes you do hear that sometimes, and I find it slightly odd. Even if you've had a horrible experience somewhere, and I've had horrible experience at some places, it still goes towards...
Still a learning experience, yeah.
It still goes towards forming what you become, you know, whereas I was only at Rural for a short time, but I think that the quality of work that they do and the sensitivity of what they do, I think is absolutely informed what we... Again, I think it's...
Both great sides, they're all...
I think it's worryingly rare to hear an architect talking about another architect in such a positive way, you know. But looking at where we are now and the kind of stuff we hope to be doing, because I don't think we're doing the stuff of the calibre we want to do yet, but we're aware of stuff that we are working on currently.
That's good to be ambitious, yeah.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that comes from, my eyes were opened hugely when I went to Rural Design and got to see what small scale work involved. You know, because
was it a shock coming from RMGM?
Oh yeah, it was a huge
living
shock.
In the city.
It was
that the first time you lived anywhere that remote?
Yeah, a little bit, but a lot of my family were from the West Coast.
Ah, okay.
Even though I was brought up in Glasgow, and so it wasn't a shock in terms of living style, and that's the living style that my wife and I prefer.
Yeah.
You know, but it was a shock in terms of scale of work and the understanding that you're not one of a team of 8 working on a job.
No, you're often your own project.
Often, yeah, and it's that provoked a real interest in me that I didn't know was there. you know, and in many ways I'm very grateful to the recession for that, actually, because if it hadn't happened, would I have had the drive to go to smaller scale work?
Yeah.
Perhaps not.
It's because the budgets get smaller even though the work changes. I would think it perhaps a positive note. You
Yeah,
know?
but I'm going to talk a little bit later about the right client and the right job for you, and how there's no one size fits all for what a practice should do. You know, and I think that there is a tendency to think that there's a progression, that you start on small scale domestic work, then large scale domestic work, then you move into social housing or public buildings, and it's almost like the bigger the building the better. And I understand that as a progression.
That's to do with money and growth though, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, partly, but it's partly driven by architectural education, where the further on you are
First
in
year
school,
you do a house,
the bigger the projects
third year
are.
you do a housing
And
project.
I don't necessarily agree that the larger is the more complex.
Oh, interesting.
And we definitely do not want to pursue that traditional trajectory. We have a very set plan for our practice and what we want to do, where we want to go.
And have you always had that set plan?
No, it's developed over time. Yeah, and I would say it's really properly crystallised in the last year or so, when we've passed up the opportunity to bid on a couple of projects that you look at them on paper and you think it's very prestigious, and we're delighted to be asked. And the company that we're in, you know, going for it. I mean, we interviewed for a job about 6 months ago, and another one a couple of months ago, where the other practices on the list are people that I was just delighted to hear our name in such company. And actually I was so relieved when we didn't get the last one.
Really?
That I decided there was 2 other ones that we were in the running for at the time, and we pulled out.
You did apply, you were in the process of maybe getting there, and then
one of them we were halfway through preparing a bid.
Okay, yeah.
With some other companies who we were working for. It was for a culture/arts building, I would say. And
This one you did with Regan Hall, maybe?
No, we put in a bid with Regan Hall for a building that it would have been a wonderful project to do. I respect the work an awful lot. And we didn't get it, which we were disappointed in at the time. A very good firm did get it. And then with hindsight, when I look back at it, I'm actually extremely relieved.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it would have distracted us from what I hope is the laser beam focus that we have developed about what we would like to do.
Yeah.
And I think that there are all different types of architects, and I think that that's something perhaps neglected in education. And an architect who works on hospital buildings will need a very different skill set and perhaps a very different set of interests to one who works on domestic work or small scale culture. And I think that finding your niche, I think, is actually what the recession gave us, actually. You know, was that it took us out of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
My wife at that time was working in conservation architecture, which had always been her interest, and then she was retraining as a planner, which she did. So it was a big change, and it really broadened our horizons, I would say. And looking back on it, doesn't seem that way, because you think, or at the time, sorry, it didn't seem that way, because you think, how are we going to pay the bills?
Of course, yeah.
But when you actually get to further down the line and you look back and you think, if it hadn't been for those things, that wouldn't have happened. And I think many architecture practices can trace the recession to that.
Really?
I mean, often you used to see articles in the AJ and the architectural press about people who had been born out of the recession, practices that had come from that, and how it had shaped them. And obviously recessions are often on a cycle, and I know that every generation has a recession story.
Or two.
And I think when I left university, it was extremely easy to get a job. Even the poor students were offered 4 and 5 jobs. And I was offered half a dozen. I know people that were offered twice that, you know. And I made the decision based on where I thought would be the best firm at the time to go and work for. It was the less money of everything I was offered, but that wasn't what was important. And I think that it almost made you complacent, actually.
Really?
It did, in a way, you know, and it's...
you know, sitting back going, this is...
But a little bit, because
well, yeah.
You didn't understand that actually getting a job can be a very difficult thing, you know, and which I'm sure people understand now, and we certainly understand having... I was made redundant at a time that my wife had decided to retrain in planning and was a mature student, and so we went to another firm only for it to suffer a global collapse.
Oh,
you mentioned them earlier, and so then I had to move again. But when you look back on it, what a blessing, really. And I think that's the way to consider everything, you know. everything bad that happens to you helps form what you are. You know, and
Probably maturity as well.
Well, I mean, architects talk a lot, even here. I mean, David McLean, the head of school here, used to speak about learning through failure. And I remember him saying once when we were working on a paper together about, we talk about learning through failure, but then if a student fails, they fail. So where is the bet? You know, like, so there is a negative consequence to it. You know, but actually we probably learn more from the fail.
Most people tend not to fail twice, yeah.
You know, so it's, which I think is something that...
Again, they were taking away the stigma away from failing, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk later about a project that we did that was very well received, but that we are extremely unhappy with.
Interesting.
You know, and I think because we look at it now and think we didn't do anything wrong, quote unquote. The clients are delighted with the building and we delivered what they asked for.
You could see something better, or is it?
I think that now that I understand perhaps people a little bit more, I think I would hopefully have been able to tease out from them something that they would have been happier with.
Fair play.
And it plays in my mind that, and I think we use that in jobs now, that we think about that when we speak to people. You know, that it's like when you're given a brief in first year, you know, and it says, you know, make X. So you just start making X.
Make a house, yeah.
Rather than thinking about the stuff behind it. And I think that the more that you understand how people and the process are integrated, the better you can collaborate with them and draw out things.
Talking about that old project you're going, I can see better. It reminds me of David Fincher, you know, David Fincher. He always says films aren't finished, they're abandoned.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, anything creative, you're probably always looking back and trying to...
Absolutely.
Trying to get better
and it's a curse in a way. Because
it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it creates... I think in me it used to create a certain anxiety.
Really?
Which I think people are quite loath to talk about. And I've had some anxiety issues over the years that I'm quite open and honest about, and it comes from people that you see, like John O'Smart, who is a potter, who I don't mind name dropping, I don't know him well. And,
a potter,
he's a potter, he's a ceramicist.
Oh, okay.
And he talks a lot about his mental health and things, and you see someone talking so openly about how it influences their creative process.
Interesting,
and that I find extremely interesting, and it's helped me deal perhaps with a certain anxiety, because we all want to be good, we all want to create wonderful things, and you do something and it doesn't live up to your expectations, you can either wallow or you can try to make sure that the next one you learn from, like what you're talking about, Fincher, you know, who I love, you know, and that idea that you're never happy is a curse, but I think it's what makes design and things wonderful.
It goes back into that, you know, self-criticism, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, and it's about not being, you don't want to be down on yourself, you want to be up on yourself. And I think taking ownership of what you think you could do better is what makes designing things wonderful.
There you go. Just talking about, because I want to talk about it, on your website you list things you like as the quality life of Steve Zissou. Is that you that's a fan of Wes Anderson?
It's yes, both of us.
Because if someone else, there'd be no point in thinking of you, but
both of us that have, my wife and I, we're both fans of Wes Anderson. Myself maybe, but in different ways, we like different films. So for example, one of my favourite films is Darjeeling Limited.
I've not seen it.
Which my wife loathes because she thinks it's about nothing. And it is about nothing.
Most Wes Anderson films.
But then we both love The Life Aquatic, which is also about nothing. So because for me, I'm less interested in where it's going and how it's getting there. But then you see something like Moonrise Kingdom, which I can't stand.
Really?
I can't stand it. And then you see something.
Is it because it's got kids in it?
I really don't know. It just and then you see the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Oh, fantastic.
And it's. Yeah, it's wonderful, and it's an appreciation for people in other fields, which again is actually a big part of what I'm going to talk about later, is about how collaborative working and working with people who are fantastic at what they do, that's different from what you do, can really bring you along yourself, you know. And I think that the things of what we like was actually more, it was stolen from another architect who's a friend of mine.
I know, David,
yeah, who tells everyone that, but I'd like to think that we've improved on it, but I don't know if that's true.
You know, and, everyone's website's got the project page, why not everyone have the other one?
Well, you know, we once got a project because I went to see them and they said, oh, we love uniform wears watches. Do you have a uniform? I saw your uniform Wales watch on your website. Because they understood that it was a shared affinity for something.
It's mutual taste, isn't it?
Yeah, in a way that they don't have to like what we like, but they understand that we can perhaps pick out things and know the difference between something that might work and something that will really work, you know. And we got another job, actually, now I think about it, we usually have a place on our website that we like, you know, it's usually a link to a Google map.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a beach that we love. And
is that a private beach? You know?
No, Melonudgal. On the west coast.
Beach, yeah.
It is. It's only taken me 10 years to learn how to say it.
Is that out near Mallaig, or is it?
No, it's between Ullapool and Gairloch.
Gairloch, yeah.
It's kind of north of Loch Ewe.
I don't know Loch Ewe, but I know the road to Ullapool.
And we dropped this because we had spent a week there and we really enjoyed it, and we had went to see some buildings and the architects do on holiday. And the client had a site near there.
Fantastic.
And again, it just creates it just makes them understand who we are, because them picking us and us picking them is all part of the one conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And if that match isn't right on a domestic job in particular, I feel you're really building on sand at that point, you know. And it's again, part of that is by perhaps getting that relationship wrong in the past, to be honest, and understanding how important it can be, you know.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't chat more.
It's alright, no problem.
But that's our time. It's time to go for lunch.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.